Ocean Pines is a vibrant residential community nestled on Maryland's eastern shore. With over 9 miles of waterfront property, amenities like an 18-hole championship golf course and a public yacht club, and a rich history dating back to 1968. Of course, if you live here, you probably know most of that. And if you don't, it's almost all apparent from your first visit. Each week on the Pines Cast, we work to bring out the ocean pines that might be less apparent. We celebrate the region, the amenities, and, most of all, the people who make and keep Ocean Pines a special place to live. Welcome to the Pines Cast, your source of news and insights about Ocean Pines and the official podcast of the Ocean Pines Association. This week, we are speaking with Chief Meteorologist from WMDT, Rich Wirdzek. And it's just a great conversation. He's just really an engaging guy. We're going to talk about the weather, but in a way that is not just to kill time, in a way that is legitimately to be informative. And he talks about not only how he got into the weather, but how you can and probably should consider getting into the weather. So let's just talk to Rick. Here he is. So welcome. I'm very excited to have you here and very, very excited to talk about the weather, especially as we proceed into this weekend, which is going to be spotty. But before we talk about the weather, let's talk about you a little bit. How did you end up here and why?
Tony, I want to thank you for having me, by the way. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm honored that you'd have me on here to talk to the fine folks at Ocean Pines. And I like to get a chance to introduce myself to a lot of people who don't know who I am. A chief meteorologist, Rich Wirdzek. I'm chief meteorologist for 47 ABC WMDT. And how I got here, well, it all started with Maryland. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, over the bridge in Montgomery County in the D.C. area. So I know a lot of people listening may actually be from that area there. So I live in Salisbury right now at the TV, just outside of the TV station, not at the TV station, although sometimes it feels like I do live there. 2 hours from my parents' doorstep, so getting back here to Maryland was always a goal, and it's great to be close to family and friends. But how I got here was probably one big giant circle, if you want to look at it that way. I guess I could start from the very beginning, how I got into weather. You want me to start there?
Why meteorology? Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So it starts from me being just a scared little kid of tornadoes and thunderstorms and petrified of the weather growing up. So it started as an anxiety in my life. And then as I got older, I became more and more, I use the word obsessed as to, what these things were that were scaring me, what it was about the weather. It was a fascination with that. As I got a little older, and less scared, I was still nervous of storms, but maybe in high school, I started thinking, well, this is kind of what I want to do. I want to be able to tell people about the bad weather. I want to be the one to warn everybody, and I felt like at least I had some purpose with that. And I started really thinking, okay, this is something that maybe I can find a little bit of a purpose in. I'm not thinking those words in my head when I'm 15 years old, but that feeling was there.
Yeah.
That I wanted to learn more about this fascination and fear and be able to warn other people or tell other people what's going on with bad weather, because it was something that was so important to me. I wanted to, be the information deliverer, I guess, the messenger. So I went to college, California University of Pennsylvania. It's a school just outside of Pittsburgh. It's called Penn West now, by the way. They've changed names, but I got my 4-year degree there, broadcast in operational meteorology. And, I got to learn everything about weather. We had every sort of class that you can take in the curriculum. And one of the coolest things I was able to do is become a storm chaser. We had a storm chase class, and you got an A just as long as you didn't drive the storm chase vehicle into a tornado. So we were okay with that. But that really set me on my professional path at that point. My first job was at I interned at KDK in Pittsburgh, which was an incredible opportunity. That's a historical station in the United States, one of the first TV stations. And from there, got a small job part-time at a cable outfit in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And then my first real, big-time job, full-time, was in Columbus, Mississippi. And I got a chance to experience Hurricane Katrina, tornado outbreaks. And then from there, it was 10 years in Dayton, Ohio. Same thing, severe weather outbreaks. So I really learned a lot about tracking some of the scariest weather that I dealt with as a little kid. I learned to really cut my teeth, kind of honing my abilities to track that for people. And that's where I think that, I bring here to Delmarva. I was able to bring in a little bit of expertise from some of places of the country that have some of the worst weather in the world. So that's how I got back here. Chief meteorologist job was opened. I went for it, and not many people can say they're back in their home state or home area to work in TV. It's hard. There
Yeah.
aren't too many jobs out there. So really, really grateful that I'm in Maryland. I can say that I'm, a chief meteorologist in my home state. So that's how I got here.
That's super cool. I gotta ask you about being in the storm chasing van.
Yeah.
So that's something that, many of us have maybe seen on television or whatever, but like,
Yeah.
um, the first time you're in it, there must be, some nervousness.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's one thing to see it on TV. It's one thing to even see it in IMAX theater at the time when we were doing this. I know that IMAX at the time was the big thing, kind of putting out some of these real like immersive experiences. And at that time, that felt real. But then being out there, I remember the first supercell that we drove up on. I believe it was in Texas, and
I'm sorry. What's a supercell?
a supercell. A supercell is like the biggest thunderstorm that exists. It is the most violent thunderstorm. It's the most mature textbook type thunderstorm. It basically is the type of thunderstorm that's going to produce a tornado.
Mm,
Possibly, like if you need a tornado, if you have a tornado, it's usually coming from some sort of a supercell
I see.
structure. But it's a violent thunderstorm. It's your classic textbook giant storms that you see that have the high cloud tops and the anvil up top and the really low
Mhm.
bases and stuff like that. Supercells, they're the easiest to chase because you can see them. You can be away from them and kind of view the storm from a safe distance. And if you get a little close, you just have better options to be around them. So as far as chasing and being in the Midwest, you can see things. So I remember as we got closer and closer, I'm like, this is awesome. This is great. But when we got really close, I experienced the first real big hail of my life. And I remember I cracked the windshield in our van.
Wow.
And it's hard to describe that because you witness that kind of violence up close and you're like, wow, okay. It's like somebody took a hammer to our storm chase van. And then I just remember looking at my palms. You were feeling my palms. They were wet because I was
Right.
so like nervous.
Right.
So yeah, that was my first experience. It definitely my nervous system was kicking in.
And what's cool about being out there, I've had the privilege to be out in the Midwest. You can see the storms from very far away, like
Yeah.
very, very far away. And it's something that, you can only do here. Like at the beach, I guess you can see forever. But like, I live in Delmar and I can't even see the Selbyville from here. But when you're out driving, in Texas, you can see Mexico. Like,
Yeah. Yes, and it provides the landscape and the backdrop for the beautiful video and photos that you see, but it also, from a scientific standpoint, being able to properly chase these thunderstorms and document the structure of the storm and all these components that go into it from a safe distance. You can only do it in places like that. There are no tree lines. There's like you said, you could see miles and miles and miles away. Although out here in Delmarva, we have elements of that out here. I think you and I were talking before, like I would say the beach is always a place that kind of reminds me of being in the Midwest when there's an active weather situation, because you have that ability to see so far out and so far around you, especially if you're away from, like if you're in Ocean City, if you're away from maybe the Strip a little bit, if you're down closer to Assateague and you have more of that view, 360 view, not just over the ocean, but also in all directions around you. It reminds me of being in the Midwest.
Yeah, and you can see the storms coming in. When I was a kid, I grew up on the Jersey Shore, and we would actually go down the beach. I lived by the bay to watch the storms come in, and it would be so cool because I could see like I could see New York and then the Verrazano Bridge, and then you could see like dots behind it, and then all of a
That's really
sudden
cool.
you could see the clouds coming, and then the bridge would disappear, and then you could see the rain coming up the sand at you. And that was just the coolest experience. It's like the tick, 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 pow. And then you're
Wow.
in the
Yep.
middle of a storm. It's really something. If someone's at the beach and they want to kind of look at the weather, are there things that can be seen, or is that something that you need satellites for?
No, actually, I think the beach is one of the best places that we have to be able to see something weather related happen like that's textbook. I think it's something that people can do, and I encourage people to do this here when we get into the warm season. Take advantage of this. We've got all these beaches that you can just enjoy your day, but also watch weather in action. On the hot days, you can see some of the most violent interactions with our atmosphere happen right before your eyes. Just, in the heating of the day when the sky's all blue and all of a sudden you see those little puffy cumulus clouds building, you're watching the violent updrafts of the hot air from the surface just a few miles inland rising up into the air, creating these big cumulonimbus clouds, which are those thunderstorm clouds that we see during the heat of the summer. And you can watch that process of the rising air turning into these massive storms, that rising air eventually condensing, cooling, and then, becoming the cloud. And you can just see that in the distance in slow motion. It's really cool. And if you watch closely, I encourage people to, you look inland to see this happen, but you could see the clouds rising high into the sky and kind of expanding like a slow kernel of popcorn popping in the microwave. If it was like slow motion, something like that. It's just so cool to watch that. And that's some of the most violent, air movement we have in the atmosphere to create clouds on a hot summer day. It's an example of maybe on a much larger scale, obviously, what happens with thunderstorms over the ocean, the hot ocean, that eventually, create hurricanes, stuff like that. So when you're at the beach, think about it too. The sea breeze is coming in. The air over the water is always going to be cooler. It acts as a mini cool front, right? And it goes inland, interacts with that super hot air, and it acts as a wedge, and it forces all that hot air into the sky, and you can watch those clouds billow up. So you can see something textbook happen right in front of your eyes.
It's a little, precious, but I like to think of it anyway. Like when you're watching a cloud form, you're really seeing like literal molecules coming together
Yes.
of water, and
Right.
to imagine that that's little tiny pieces of water making just enough that you can see them, but they're not heavy enough to fall. It's just it always fascinates me. It's something miraculous.
It's amazing, right? You see something like that in the distance, and it has such a physical structure to it. It looks so solid, but if you fly through it, you can, in a plane, you just go through it, or at the ground, that's fog.
Yeah.
That's what, fog is just a cloud on the ground. You're driving through the cloud. So it's just amazing that something from a distance looks so solid, but it's yet something you can pass completely through.
I've got you here, and this is, everybody always likes to kick the weatherman. He's
Oh,
our
yeah.
favorite. He's our favorite.
Well, did you know that it's a psychology thing, glutton for punishment. That's why I got into this. So
And so we do have a suspected a suspected snowstorm maybe coming.
yeah,
And this is the time of year where, especially here on Delmarva, because we don't get a ton of snow, that people can get really nervous about it.
yes.
And so what do you do to like hedge? Um I don't even know if hedging is the right term, but to 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 inform without panicking, and then just take it on the chin if you're wrong, or if you're not as right as you could be, because it's not a yes or no, up or down
Right.
proposition.
Well, that's, I think, the first thing as I talk to a lot of fellow meteorologists across the country, but something that I think is the most important thing as a meteorologist to do is to be honest. And this is where people also get upset when there's the potential of a storm and people are seeing it online and hearing all the chatter and seeing all the crazy, maps out there that are bound to be wrong. And then they come to people like us and say, hey, what's going on? The first thing I do is be honest. And I say, literally, we're not sure yet. And most people are like, isn't that your job to be sure? And I said, well, my job is to communicate risk and communicate the truth. And if we've got long range models showing 3 different solutions, one that shows a storm off the coast, not bothering us, one that shows just close enough to the coast that we're going to get hit with heavy snow, and one that shows that we're going to have what we had last weekend, snow to sleet to freezing rain to rain, and then back to freezing everything all over again by the end of the storm. I'm going to tell you that because it's all about expectation and trying to convey impact to people. So when we're 5 and 6 days out, it's no one's best interest to put out an expected snowfall map. I've got internally, I look at models that, this past storm, there were some models saying we were going to have 48 inches of snow. Some saying 24 inches of snow. Both of those numbers right there, historically, we don't get that kind of snow here in Delmarva. We live so close to the ocean that there's so much of an impact with these storms that warm ocean air always gets involved to some degree. And if you have a lot of moisture, it's usually because the air is warmer, it holds more water. And that's when we start to look into that changeover. So I'll see stuff like that way out ahead, and I'll be like, we're not even going to go there yet. I think the most important thing to do is to focus on impact after that. You're honest and you're say, okay, here are the scenarios. I think the most important thing that people want to know is, how is this going to impact me? There are a lot of people who are going to get out there with a ruler, and if you say 3 to 6 inches of snow and you only got 3, they're going to think you're wrong because they saw the 6 in that. And during the summer, we never, we say, is it going to rain or not? You never hear people like, oh, I got a 1/4 of an inch of rain here, and this guy down here got 3/4 of an inch. You never didn't say it was going to rain that much. No one talks that way about regular rain. They just want to know, is it going to rain out my event?
Right.
Can I go to the beach or not? Will I be able to go out to the store and not have to worry about getting hit by thunderstorms? So I try to remind people of that into these snowstorms. So this is being dropped here, on a Friday morning?
Right.
More and more likely, we have a very interesting scenario here in Delmarva where the beaches in southern Delmarva may see a ton of snow, or the most snow in an event. And areas northwest of Salisbury, the northwestern side of Delmarva, won't see anything. And to be able to convey that is very difficult. So that's why we like to, show on maps like impact. If you live near the beach this time, you have a better chance of having an impactful snow.
And that's
If you
pretty
live away
rare,
from it,
right?
you don't. It is, but it happens though, and it's typically in these winter time setups where we have so much cold air in place. We have kind of the reverse issue of what typically happens, where the I-95 corridor gets slammed with snow, sleet, and freezing rain, and we eventually change over to rain. Well, in this way, it's us getting slammed, and the I-95 corridor is not getting anything. And that is a function of how deep the cold air is. Sometimes these nor'easters that develop, they might not develop into the robust storms that they would have if there was a little more warm air in place. So it's a balancing act with the atmosphere. And in a situation like that, we tend to end up with more snow because that moisture just overrides the Arctic air. And it's maybe not the big storm, but at the end of the day, it's all impact. It's just light to moderate snow that adds up to several inches. And then, it starts shutting things down.
Hi, this is Tony Russo from the Pines Cast, and I wanted to just take a second to talk to you about possibly sponsoring the podcast. The Pines Cast is special not only because it is for and about ocean pines, but also because listeners pay attention. Not only that, but the shows are essentially evergreen, so every week we have new people not only discovering our shows, but going back to listen to previous shows that might interest them or that might feature someone they're interested in hearing about. That means any branding message you want to deliver will continue to be delivered whenever that show is played, even after your sponsorship opportunity comes to an end. To hear more about our sponsorship opportunities, please reach out to us at info@oceanpines.org. That is info at oceanpines.org. All right, let's get back to the show. I live in Delmar, and my wife teaches in Pocomoke. And during the last storm, they credibly could have kept the Pocomoke schools open. It wasn't really that bad there, but we were frozen in, and it's still ice out there. I mean, I go out every hour, and I spend 10 minutes chipping away at the ice because I don't want it to snow on top of the ice already I have.
Well, I saw a term and I didn't come up with it, so I have to say that this is not my term, but I love it.
Yeah.
It's snowcrete. You had the snow, the sleet, and then the freezing rain, and then the melting the next couple of days, and it turns into this solid, like you said, you have to chip away. But you bring up such an important part of the complexity of these forecasts that I try to convey to people for impact. You bring up a good example, like your wife works in Pocomoke City and you live in Delmar. That's not that far of a distance. I mean, when
it's like
when you look at
25
a map,
miles or something.
yeah. I mean, that, you would think, okay, well, you're going to have similar weather. Well, most of the time, but not always. And in this past weekend, that's a perfect example. Delmar got a solid, thick, a mix of snow and sleet. And Pocomoke City had wet snow that just generally went over to rain. And that was the difference of just a few degrees. That warm ocean air coming in brought the temperature up to in Pocomoke, like I think at one point during mid-morning, it was 36 degrees, while Delmar was sitting probably about 29 or 30. And I mean, that's the difference of two worlds. But we saw even more of a dichotomy. You had a situation here in Ocean Pines where the temperature was about 40, 41 degrees Sunday afternoon, and it was raining. Well, over in Denton, in Caroline County, which is, more of a central part of the peninsula, it was 26 degrees with heavy sleet. And, if you see those, if you put those two images next to each other, you think you're looking at, a place in Maryland and a place maybe out in the Midwest, like, or somewhere up in the Northeast. That's such a difference between two worlds at that point. And we're only talking a short drive, relatively speaking, compared to like a larger map.
Right.
So I mean, these storms can do that. And here in Delmarva, we see that happen all the time. So now we're dealing with the reverse situation. It's just going to be snow, but where does the precipitation shield stop? And sometimes there's a sharp cutoff in the northern edge of these systems, and we're going to be brushed. It looks like on the northern and western side of this system. So it could be heavy snow for Ocean City and Ocean Pines. And then, you get over to Cambridge and Easton on the bay side of Delmarva, and, the sun's not out, but it's not snowing. And to them, they're thinking, this is not that bad of a day. But folks out here, it could be, at times even blizzard conditions when you get gusty winds with dry snow. So
something that just occurred to me while you were talking, and I can't believe it took me this long. So, as a chief meteorologist, I'm a journalist myself, but you're you're like the editor. So, like you guide the coverage. You don't do all the coverage, but you guide all the coverage. So, like, how do you get everybody on the same page? Do you talk with your colleagues about what kind of coverage a storm is going to get, or do you present? I don't want to say present a united front because that comes across the wrong way, but do you work out your differences or whatever in your opinions?
So we do. I work with my team of meteorologists. I'm very fortunate to have incredible meteorologists at our station here working on, with me. Meteorologist Jake Grant, meteorologist Eric Alf. They're, weatherman or weather person. They are, geeked about this as much as I am, and they're smart guys. And I start with them. We see these things happening. We have a group chat. We're throwing ideas around. I'm listening to what they're saying or what they're seeing. It's like, having doctors in a room. If you have a complex situation, you need to have more than one opinion. You can't be if you start thinking you're the only one and you know it all, that's the end of the road for you, and you're going to be wrong more often than not. And so I start with these guys, and we kind of come up with a consensus. And then my job is to really communicate to our news director timing. And for us internally, it's about when do we need people to be on call? When do we need to shift into storm coverage, as we say, because that's when the weather is becoming the news at that point. That weather is news. If it's impacting everybody, that's the news. And that, starts with me kind of conveying that. We have morning meetings every day. Our Jake Grant, our morning meteorologist, he provides an update in the morning meeting. So the news director is also getting that new information. But I make sure that he and, the newsroom understand when potentially we need to start shifting our focus. And then when we do get into the storm, it's about, covering it on air. We'll send reporters out. My job too is to, during some of these weather events, sometimes, especially in the severe weather season, if we get damage and the aftermath, is really guide people in the right direction. Like after this storm, it was, we had school closures everywhere, but Monday morning, the idea was that in Salisbury, points north and points west, those are the best areas to go cover. So because they had the most impact, with the most snow and sleet. So it's just a very hey, we need to go here. We need to stay away from this. Part of my job, the guide coverage too, is, work with the reporters on, how we're explaining the storm. If this is an aftermath thing, what are we calling it? And those things matter, the way you describe things, because there's so much noise on social media, as we know. People are already getting, confused about the weather forecast. So when we cover it as a story, part of my job is to make sure that we're accurately conveying what happened, what they're seeing right now, and what could happen, not just from me, but I'm making sure that the station as a whole, as a team, is conveying that message. Because at the end of the day, a media outlet, my job is to cover the weather, but if the weather is the news, we have to make sure that, maybe going back to what you said about the United Front, that we're all saying the same thing. So we're not contradicting each other, because there's already contradiction out there in the digital sphere that's so bad. So people I know are looking for some sort of consistency in messaging. So I see myself as part of that.
No, do you do much? You mentioned social media. How active are you on social media, and what is that like, and how does that change? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you're younger than me, but you're still from like you came up with social media becoming
Yeah.
more important as a reporting tool.
I mean, I'm very active on social media. You know, you're right. I came up with that. I remember when it started, 2007-ish. When I say started, I mean like social media started kind of getting into the mainstream
Right.
of news reporting and stuff like that. I remember it was about 2007. I was doing a weekend morning show with one of my closest friends, my last station, WHIO in Dayton, Gabrielle Enright. We did Saturday mornings together, and we started featuring Twitter. We used Twitter, this new thing at the time,
Right.
where it was just this like Facebook, but just like on, on Red Bull kind of thing.
Right.
And it was just these constant tweets, and it was fascinating, but people were communicating with us, and we would feature some of their tweets on air. And I remember just us integrating that in, and then just, Facebook started having fan pages, and then eventually like pages, and it kind of went from there. And, I was an early adopter, as they say. One of the guys I look up to in the meteorology world, James Spann. He's a very famous chief meteorologist down in Birmingham, Alabama. He's an early adopter of that, and I've kind of always followed kind of what he does from that standpoint. So it, you know, the social media just exploded from that. And I think a lot of meteorologists in the 2007 through 2011 timeframe really dove into social media, and I was part of that. So I've always been sensitive to that stuff. So that's why right now we're having so many problems, because social media has made it so easy for weather enthusiasts and people to kind of get down there and, talk shop. And the problem is the average public sees that and they don't know what they're looking, the difference between a graphic from an enthusiast who knows how to make graphics and a graphic that I make from the station.
Right.
Sometimes there's no difference. Sometimes their stuff looks better than the TV people,
Mhm.
and like you get online, and I'm not dissing that at all. These people are very important to the weather enterprise, but it's just hard to like sift through that. And then you have kind of the bad actors that get on social media that just want to make the money, and they will post these weather models that, 2 weeks out, that, just because of the math of the weather model, I won't go too much into the nerd of that, but it's going to show some crazy output, like of 48 inches of snow here. And they'll be like, Armageddon, Snowmageddon coming
Right.
2 weeks. And I'm still every day searching for ways to just cut through that noise and communicate. And so I've actually tried to simplify my posts more than ever. Some meteorologists, and I'll go into this too, we'll get into long, posts explaining all the different variables, but sometimes just a good post that just says, hey, this is the potential. Here's the impact. We may have a lot of snow on the beach side and no snow on the west side. And I think sometimes that's the message that people kind of want to hear, and then we'll worry about measuring it later. So that's kind of where I've gone with social media.
And you also you cultivate other weather watchers. You have people.
Yes.
Talk to me about that, because you interact with real people here, not just people on social media.
Right. So we've got, a roster of weather watchers here at 47 ABC WMDT that are some of the most dedicated, weather observers I've ever met. It's a really cool thing that we have out here. And some of these people that we have been calling in their weather reports or emailing them into the station for years. And when I say calling in, I mean, some of these date back to the 80s. And, I'll give a shout out here since the Ocean Pines here. We have Curtis and Mary in Ocean Pines. They are our loyal weather watchers. And Curtis always is sending in stuff, that's very pertinent to, the weather events. It's not just a temperature and, hey, it's cold outside. It's, these guys will, let me know if specific weather is happening on a day where we're seeing a range of weather. I mean, I remember a day we had a lot of pea-sized and nickel-sized hail out here in Ocean Pines, like so much that was covering the ground like snow. And nowhere else in the peninsula was anybody seeing any bad weather. It was just out here. It was just these thunderstorms. And we had a low freezing line aloft that day. So hail formation was easy. But at the end of the day, people are like, what the heck is happening? It's 90 degrees and, there's ice on the ground. And he was sending in photos of that to me, and I was able to really like get online and, share them on social media and show like the radar image and show people what was going on. So that's just an example of Weather Watcher, like being so important. All the time, these guys are calling in with different reports from areas, or they'll like if I'm on TV talking about some storms coming in, I'll get a weather report from a weather watcher that said, "Hey, this storm just rolled through. I had a 40-mile-per-hour wind gust." It's important for me to know that. Then I'm like, okay, that verifies the strength of that storm. That's just an example. So it's just amazing because when I'm in a studio, when a meteorologist is in the studio, I can have a couple cameras out there to see what's going on, but these people are the ground truth. And in weather, ground truth is the ultimate data that you want, because that is the observation of what is actually happening. And with your own two eyes, and having these weather watchers across the peninsula give that kind of data, you can't replicate that with any satellite or, sensing tool. Having that real-time data, a human to like provide context behind it, is very valuable. I wish we had 1,000 of these guys.
Can you have 1,000? Like, can anybody be a weather watcher? What does it take?
Anybody could be a weather watcher who's listening to this. You don't even have to be. So the weather watchers, there's no requirement with them, but they're a little more, consistent and dedicated. Some of our weather watchers, they call into several newscasts a day.
Wow.
And they never miss a day. They're ones that, like, if they don't call, I'm worried about their health. I mean, for real. And they never miss a day. So I always tell people, hey, you don't have to be like that. If you want to just send me in a weather report, I will say your name on air, and I will credit you for that. And you gain trust with some people as you know that they're a little more reliable with what they're seeing. And all you have to do is find us, WMDT.com, look for my email, Jake or Eric's, just send it in, send in a weather report. We love pictures. We love videos. Ground truth is always the key. And anytime we have bad weather coming through, I like to show the photos and videos, because I think it helps somebody who might be living like, in Ocean Pines, where it's sunny maybe at that moment, to see, hey, over in Salisbury, there's this horrible thunderstorm that looks like, like a spaceship is invading the area and people are freaking out over here. Okay. This is coming your way. Trust me. I know the sun is out. Bob over here just showed me this picture, Yeah, that anybody can be a weather watcher. It's just the degree of whether, some people are more enthusiasts about it than others, but I always welcome anyone who wants to communicate the weather to me. You make my job better, and you actually, by doing that, help everybody else, because you help to paint the picture of what's happening.
Excellent. And that is all I have for you, unless you have something else for me. Is there something I should have asked and didn't, or something I thought you'd get the opportunity to say?
I was at the Royal Farms getting some coffee on my way over, and in Salisbury, and one of the managers there that I talk to all the time, she came up to me. She's like, "Rich, this weather app that I have on my phone, it said the snow will stop soon, but it's sunny outside." And she's like, "There's not a D cloud in the sky." She was just like beside herself with this app, and she's like, "Why do they do this?" And that's when it occurred to me that, that this is now our biggest problem, is that like on these iPhones and Android, some of these built-in apps, they've got like this AI. What it will do is it'll take this data from like the radar and some of the short range models, and it will like spit out a text to let you know what the weather's going to be. And, as an example, well, if the radar has a little ground clutter on it, the radar return, and when I say ground clutter, the radar will pick up on dust in the air, flocks of birds, if it's in clear air mode. I won't go into all that, but what it will do is it'll send some data across. Whereas if you're looking at the radar, you know that it's not snowing, but that app translates those echoes into snow, and it will send it to people's apps that, hey, it's going to snow in an hour, or it's snowing right now and the sun is out. So I say that because these apps are also a day or two before, or 7 days before an event. They're telling you there's going to be 13 to 22 inches of snow between 7 o'clock in the evening Saturday and 3 in the morning Sunday. That stuff is confusing people now more than ever. And it is important for people to look for other humans like me. It doesn't have to be me. You can find another meteorologist, but somebody that is a degreed meteorologist who can provide context to all of that crazy data that's being literally thrown at you, like pushed at you like a fire hose when you turn on your phone, when you look at Facebook, any of those places. I think now more than ever, finding that expert, because we're going to be wrong, But if you know the context behind what's happening and you see that a forecast shifts, you're going to know why, and you're going to have a much better understanding, and it is going to be less headaches, and you're going to trust more what you're hearing, because context is everything. And you can have all the data in the world, but if you're not getting the right context behind it, you're getting, if you get bad data, you're getting a bad forecast. So that's kind of my soapbox
Excellent.
for that. So
Right.
if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming over, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll get you back for hurricane season.
I'm anytime, Tony. And I hope you could throw this in here too. We love our people in Ocean Pines. I was talking to my news director about that. We absolutely love interacting with people and being out here for various events that we do. And, we have some good friends who used to work at the station that work out here now too. So we're very connected to the area, but I just want to thank everybody out here listening to this, for supporting us, at WMDT. It's very difficult to cover every town in Delmarva with the same forecast, because as we talked in this podcast, It's just so diverse with the weather. The fine folks out here have always been gracious to us. So I thank everybody for that and choosing us as a source of information.
Excellent.
See, I told you that'd be a fun conversation. And if you are into being a weather watcher, please make sure you reach out. And I'll have links in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more about being a weather watcher, which is really just a way of participating in the weather. The Pines Cast is an Ocean Pines Association production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo, and our long-suffering producer is Sarah Ash. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. We would love to have some feedback. You can send it to me. My email address is bytonyrusso@gmail.com. That's bytonyrusso@gmail.com. Happy to get suggestions, happy to get critiques, happy to get requests. Whatever you want to tell me is exactly what I want to hear. But that will do it for this time, and we will catch you next time on the Pines Cast.